Kate Mueller-Falcher. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And this is video number 8, our final episode of our coverage of the book, The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. I feel terrible. I cut that last video short because I didn't want to run really over, only to discover I have very little left to talk about. I'm sorry. So this will be a short video, and I apologize. On the other hand, I have several different videos either just put up or coming up next week. I did a video with Deborah Lupien. We talked to John Keel. I have some information about Secretary of Defense Forstall, who died mysteriously. I did a video on the life of John Keel and a video on the Silverbridge disaster. So it's a little bit of extra stuff, I'm sure, to follow up on it. So let's come to the end of this very odd story. And we have heard that there was an ominous feeling. People were feeling oppressed, that something terrible was going to happen, having nightmares about people and presence floating in the water. And the UFO stuff seemed to have abated. So the friend that had talked to Keel, the guy who worked for the Voice of America, called him and said, that episode we recorded, it got erased. And the same thing happened with the German TV show. He had done a half an hour interview with this German TV show, and it was all gone. It was all static. And then this crew went to Woody's house to interview him at home, and they actually witnessed some sort of, they thought it was Mr. Cold. They saw a blob, a luminous blob over the house. Ivan's stories disappeared in the mail on the way to the editor, things he wrote. One came back from an unknown address in Florida. A story Keel sent arrived at the editor's It arrived all dog-eared on different paper than what he had typed it on, with a different format of type. And the story was not really what he had written. He said it was a poor imitation, a piece of garbage. Back in New York City, he discovered that his entire list of contactees had been told by the ETs that he was dead. Each individually was told, oh, Keel died. Now began all kinds of vicious rumors. Weird things began to happen. The reports of his death, that was just the start of it. People found they would wake up to the smell of the gas in the stove had been left running, and they hadn't done it. There were weird, inexplicable fires in people's houses. Some contactees were pressured to sign a contract for their soul, like Daniel Webster. The name Leah, L-I-A, began popping up everywhere. It was an ET name. It was contactee names. A contactee, not knowing this, named her baby that. Dan said it was his mother's name. There was just this string of weird synchronicities. Keel got stuck in an elevator briefly. Contactees called that night to say, Mr. Apple got in touch with me. He was laughing about you being stuck in an elevator. He hadn't told anybody. Contactees began being told that an EM event would interfere with the White House Christmas tree lighting, that LBJ would throw the switch to light the tree and the power would go off all over the country. Meanwhile, Keel's telephone bills were ridiculously high and getting higher for no apparent reason. He had constant phone interference. He finally demanded a personal inspection of his entire line. On December 13th, he met with a tech and a special agent, not knowing who was a special agent from the phone company. He met at the phone exchange close to his apartment. He was impressed by the security. They trust the accessible lines, like they could trace some of the lines that were not buried in conduits or buried in the ground or whatever, the walls. They were able to trace accessible lines all the way to his apartment. He had studied ahead of time. He knew how the equipment worked, and he knew that it was from the 1920s, that it was outdated, but it seemed to be in good working order. It seemed impossible that somebody could tap into these lines. By accident, a friend misdialed him when her finger slipped. So she was just a digit or two off. But he answered the phone. It rang at his house. He told her, do that again. And she did, and he answered again. And that was how he discovered there were two numbers, two lines going into his house. And he hadn't known about it. Had no idea. So after having friends test both numbers, sometimes his phone didn't ring, but the friend would get someone who offered to take a message for Mr. Keel. One day, he called that other number. Somebody answered, and he said, hi, this is John Keel. Any messages for me? He said there was a gasp on the other end of the line, and the phone went dead. He went to lodge a formal complaint with the FBI, and they actually took him seriously. He stopped paying his bills, and he cut off the phone, but he kept using the number that wasn't registered, and it worked. He observes that phones can be tapped by parking near a phone or near a phone line, and you can interfere with it electronically. I don't know. He didn't explain. He talked about weird silver tape that was hanging off of phone lines randomly. He had reports of contactees telling him that weird guys showed up and would string this silver tape on their phone lines outside. And they called the cops, and the cops said things like, oh, the silver tape again. March 68, over an area just west of Point Pleasant, a large plane dropped silver tape all over the trees in the woods. He got a sample of it, and it was the same as the tape that was left on the phone lines. A puzzlement. He started to feel paranoid. He said he was beginning to think the Air Force, the phone company, ETs, and everyone were lying or in cahoots. He said nothing to anybody about the impending blackout. The Pope hadn't been killed in Turkey. No chemical tanks had exploded along the Ohio River, which is what he expected the disaster would have been. So on December 15th, the blackout did not happen with the lighting of the White House Christmas tree. But, now this is just creepy. The moment that LBJ hit the button, hit the switch, and turned on the lights, the program was interrupted by emergency broadcasting of a bridge disaster on the Ohio River. Keel was really upset. He was furious that somehow these ETs knew this was going to happen and bothered to give false information, false warning, and didn't warn people to save people from, drowning. Chapter 19, When the Birds Gather. If you remember, Garuda in the Vedic texts was this big, giant Mothman-like bird that people rode on his back, gods rode on his back. So the year of Garuda was November 15th of 1966 to December 15th of 1967. Ice cream man. 13 months. And then it came to an end. So he talks about the bridge. I've done an updated information video on it, and I actually give more information and more accurate information because when he wrote the book, they didn't have all the information. So what happened was at 5 p.m., which is considered rush hour, and it was a little more busy because there was a problem with the light on the opposite end of the bridge from Point Pleasant. It connected West Virginia and Ohio. And on the opposite end, there was a faulty light. And so the feeding traffic onto the bridge was erratic. So the traffic was weird. But the bridge was well able to take much more weight than actually ended up being on it. That wasn't a factor. At 5:04, the bridge collapsed. It just fell into the river. And 50 cars went into the Ohio River, full of people who were going home from work or Christmas shopping. Mary Hyre had been killing time in the drugstore across the street from the bridge because she was going to the Gallipoli Hospital on the other side of the bridge to collect the daily notes that they gave every day for the paper. And she was just trying to avoid this Christmas shopping traffic. And she saw people and gifts in the water, floating in the water, like her dream. People waiting to get onto the bridge when it collapsed, they had to be treated for shock. They narrowly missed being on that bridge. Witnesses spotted a flashing red light over the trees, and then a blindingly bright white light flashed, it appeared, and started bobbing up and down. It was not an airplane. At the same time, 12 of those kind of lights were counted coming up from the TNT area and going towards town. The witness, actually it was a family who saw this, fled to the relatives that they had close by and moved out of town a few months later. Keel was finally able to get Mary on the phone because the phones were just, you can imagine. And she said, "It's what I dreamed of. I was prepared for it. It was exactly what my dream was." One woman told Mary that 2 days before the collapse, she'd seen two guys in checkered coats and black trousers and fancy dress shoes climbing up to the side of the bridge. Mary asked Keel, "Do you think that this had anything to do with the UFOs and the bird thing that we saw, not yet called Mothman?" He didn't know, and they both got warnings, but they didn't get warnings that were enough to do anything or save anybody, and they weren't accurate. And he comes to the conclusion, you can't change the future. He contemplated the last year of the 13 months, really, of being in and out of Point Pleasant, talking to people. He said he'd been led into relationships that were weird and events that were strange and beyond his control. He said he watched these lights night after night bouncing like they were mocking. He said there was a fallout from all of this. A number of contactee couples divorced, and then they remarried other contactees. I thought that was weird. People died. Mary Hyre died. Ivan died. Condon from Colorado, he died. Fred Freed, remember, he died. He said by the 10th anniversary of the bridge collapse, many, many people who had been involved, either directly or peripherally, were dead. Many who saw the creature with the red eyes died within 6 months. He said, there's still reports of the lights appearing in the same areas. But the people that lived there for a long time, they don't make fun of it anymore. They don't scoff. The whole topic is being taken a whole lot more seriously. And he made a couple of quotes here. He said, "Belief is the enemy of truth. And the more I learn, the less I know." That's my motto. And I apologize for this being so short, but I'm sorry it just worked out that way. For sure, check out the other videos. There's 3 or 4 videos that you'll be interested in. Forrestal, the bridge disaster, John Keel himself, and then, of course, Deborah Lupien and I had a very interesting conversation with John Keel. You won't want to miss that. And I hope you enjoyed this. It was kind of meant to be a lighthearted departure from all of the philosophy and, the Opus Dei. And it ended up not being so lighthearted. Thank you. Thank you for joining me, and have a nice rest of your weekend. And I will be back next week. And let me know if you want to continue with these books. Song of Oil, Slunch.